Probably can get rid of this stuff here. Exited host mode. I guess we're off to the races. Good deal. Oh my goodness. Okay. Doopy-doo. So, today we are going to go ahead and start with doing a bit of a basing tutorial. This is something that I actually did when I was at Adepticon for a bunch of the streamers that were there. No, that's not adjusted correctly either. Alright, let's get that about where we need it. Good deal. So, got some various sizes, 60mm, 50mm, 40mm, 30mm bases. I'm just going to do a quick sort of derp. Words are hard. Like a shale base type thing on this. And then the interesting thing is that Elric's Hobbies was actually potentially interested in me doing a full set of bases for them. I do need to follow up with Elric's Hobbies. I got a chance to talk to them when I was at Adepticon. Actually, part of Mike Disney was like, dude, you gotta go ahead and talk to these guys. So, hey, Maharoon, how you doing, sweetie? Yeah, so I'm gonna start with this, and then I'll probably pause the stream just so that it's easier for me to delineate the video, because I'm also going to go ahead and send this video to Shoshi's Minis, who is going to hopefully hook me up with a teaching spot at Adepticon next year. So there's a couple of things that are going on today, in addition to this being the first stream since I got back from Adepticon, because if you all didn't know, I got pneumonia, which is great fun. Javasuko, hey! So anyway, the second half, or the second portion of the stream, I've got this piece here. So, I'm gonna build an orc village on this. It's for War Master, so it's 10mm, so it's gonna be pretty tiny stuff. But it'll be a combination of some sculpting work, a bunch of work with some balsa, possibly a little bit of bass, a little bit of pine wood, and some of this stuff, which is pretty cool. Boy, I've got a pretty hefty delay on the video there, which is unfortunate. But here, let's see if we can do this. It actually transmits light pretty well. So, part of the ask for this commission is that there is a glowing orc totem. So, I'm only going to be able to get so far on this because I actually have to pick up some LEDs, and somewhere in this, I'm going to... Hey, Karakanid, how you doing? I'm going to go ahead and build or sculpt a totem up around one of these pieces. You can actually see it, like, it flakes apart pretty easily, too. It's pretty neat stuff. So I'll wind up reducing this down a little bit, but it does do an excellent job of transmitting light. So I may be able to go ahead and set this up and actually do the orc totem on this as well. So we'll see where we get to. But to start, like I said, we're going to go ahead and begin with getting some bases sculpted here. So to that end, the preferred material that I use is Aves Epoxy Sculpt. And you should probably use gloves with this stuff, I don't, but, you know, so. And this will go in a couple of steps, a couple of phases. I'll probably start with these 60mm guys here. So I get a equal measure out of both part A and part B. What is that called? Which, the ABS epoxy sculpt? Wow, the delay is particularly bad. The mineral, the rock material, derp. You know, I don't know. I'm gonna have to ask the person that gave it to me. They gave me a whole cup of the stuff. It's really cool stuff, though. So, yeah. I don't know. Like I said, I'll have to go ahead and follow up with them and find out what it's actually called. Yeah. So, sorry, I don't actually know. Okay. So, we're gonna go ahead with equal parts A and B, and the easiest way, I typically just roll them both into a ball. That way you can pretty easily compare sizes. Yeah, Maha, I'll go ahead and make a point of trying to find it for you. I do need to figure out what it is in case I want to get some more later on. I have so much of it, though, I'm not sure I will. I mean, unless I use that for, like, some sort of alien landscape or something on, like, a full-on table commission or something like that. So one of the things that has been asked in the past and often is asked is, and this applies for milliput as well, so equal parts A and B. Do not go very far away from equal parts A and B. Adding more of one material will not make it harder, will not make it cure faster, it will just make it so it doesn't cure. So be sure to only mix this stuff. So ABS epoxy sculpt and milliput. It's not like Kneadatite or green stuff where you can add a little bit more blue and it'll actually make it cure a little harder. If you don't mix this stuff evenly, it won't cure. So be sure to keep that A and B at about equal. I mean, it does allow for a little bit of flexibility, but not a huge amount. As long as it's pretty close, you should be fine. And then the next step is to mix it up pretty thoroughly. And one of the things that when I was at Adepticon I sort of talked about was that this process sort of benefits pretty well from sort of like a sketchy style. You don't really have to be super precise. Dark Initiative, yes, milliput is actually worth it. I do use milliput superfine. It's more expensive than the ABS epoxy sculpt. ABS epoxy sculpt, you can get 4 pounds of it for about $45 US. Whereas milliput, you'll get, I think it's 8 or 10 ounces. I have a container, it's too far to reach. I forget exactly how much it is, but usually it's a relatively small amount for around $15 or so. So, but the superfine, as you mix this, so you can actually mix water with both ABS epoxy sculpt and milliput, and thin it down to the point where it's literally just, no. So it behaves actually quite a bit different than green stuff. Green stuff is an aquaphobic putty in that you can't introduce water to it to thin it out. So you can literally, like in this case, if I take a little bit of water here and I start doing this, I wind up with this sort of fine particulate that comes up. You can literally thin this stuff out and paint it on with a brush if you want. The same deal can be said for milliput. Now, the good thing with these is this stuff dries really hard. So unlike milliput, that's not enough for this one. So I guess I'll do a smaller base. Go with a 50 mil here. I want to have a fair amount of thickness on this. Jeez, and that's probably going to be too much. Interesting. Alright, well, we'll try this. We'll go ahead with a little bit of a thinner application than I normally prefer. But this stuff dries so hard, you can actually chuck it up in a lathe drill and tap it. You can sand it, you can file it, you can do all sorts of stuff. So you'll notice here, I've got some variation in how thick this is. And I'm not really being super careful here, you know. I've got fingerprints all over it, so not really very careful. I need to go ahead and turn down the gain here a little bit. Yeah, absolutely. You can make grime with it, or texture, or whatever else you want. You can actually thin it out into like that slurry and use it to fill pits in metal miniatures, plastic miniatures, anything that you want. So I use a tool here. It's sort of like a spatula. This is probably the most common sculpting tool that you'll see, where it's got this nice little round and then a sort of knife on the other end. And you can get the job done with this by just sort of, you know, working it around like so. I like this because it has a larger working surface, so it's much easier to sort of drag it about and stuff, smooth things out. So I'm just going to go ahead and introduce some variation here. Really not being terribly careful at this point, right? Just going to go ahead and smooth out most of the fingerprints, because we don't want fingerprints to show. Yeah, yep, I use this for sculpting miniature components all the time. So, in fact, what you typically see when you see something that looks like it's green stuff for sculpting on miniatures, it's not. It's a type of wax. So also what I'm doing is I'm beginning to set up sort of planes. You can see how I'm dragging the tool. Are we out of focus? We are a little out of focus. Let me try to get this fixed up here so you can see a little better. There we go, that's a little better. And I'm going to turn the gain down. And I'll up the contrast a little bit more. It's difficult when you're dealing with like something that's super white like this. Which would be the best for rigid interior for sculpting that firewall? Probably epoxy sculpt Maha. Because so if you're gonna do like you're gonna build an armature, you want to be able to cut and sand the interior of the armature if you don't particularly like what you have. Okay, so now what I'm starting to do, I'm just dragging the tool along, and whoops, not right in the frame here. Let's get this a little closer. So I'm just beginning to introduce some strata lines, and all you have to do is take the tool, push down a little bit, and sort of pull it around. So I'm also going where I've got like these sort of points that stick out a little bit, and just trying to knock them back a little bit. You know, if you want, also you can do things like this, where you come into an area and just push down, like so, and then come in. Let's go ahead and bring that up like this. So it looks like there's a little bit of an interesting sort of strata that occurs there. I mean, it's really very, very loose. You don't have to really worry too much about it. There's a couple of rules that do need to be followed. You don't want to have any of these lines end in the middle of nowhere. So if I were to do one, let's see if you can see there. So like coming over here, right? I've got some interesting stuff going on. My tool wet. I'm bringing all of these lines out to an edge somewhere. So if I do something like this, and I leave it like that, it's not going to look right. There's going to be something that seems wrong with it. However, if I take it all the way out to another line, got some fingerprints that I've got to deal with, or an edge, it's going to look more natural, and that's actually rather important. Bring out your lines, bring out your... Indeed, Redhead. How you doing, man? It's good to see you. And they don't have to be terribly long, you know, they can be short like I just did here, where I'm working in just a little bit of stuff there. So I've got some interesting stuff that I'd sort of introduced before by pushing things down, and I'm just going to follow along that edge. Again, keeping my tool wet. And you can spend a lot of time on this, a little bit of time on this. So I've got these round portions here. That's also something that typically doesn't happen with shale. So I'm going to use this pointed edge of the tool here. And just sharpen this up just a little bit. So I don't want these nice, pretty round bits. Shale doesn't break in a fashion like that. Oh, I'm not finished yet. I'm not lined yet. Yeah. I think I'll go for a walk. Sorry about that, Redhead. So I'm just going to continue to work all the way around the piece, gradually building more and more sort of, well, just straddle lines, or sediment lines, I guess is actually more appropriate. And you can go pretty light also and do more subtle, especially when you get out, oops. That's usually counterproductive. Once you get out towards the more flat areas, it's a rather obscure one. What, bring out your dead? That's not obscure. I'm just sort of kind of out of it still. So, and the flatter the area gets, the more gentle you need to be with the tool. So like up in here where I've got a relatively flat area and I don't want too much relief, I'm just using a little bit of pressure to go ahead and just add a little bit more interest. Now when you get down into the more vertical stuff, you can really kind of go nuts with just dragging the tool through and Monty Python is best Python. This is true. This is very true. Where there's more relief, you can be much just sort of random, much more random. You know, the whole technique is pretty forgiving. And it also depends on what you want to do. You know, this may be enough for a figure that you're working for once I get all the fingerprints out. You know, if you wanted to do, like, maybe this is like grasses or flocked over this or something like that. This could very easily be done at this point. You can move on to the next one. Nice. But, you know, for the sake of just continuing here, I'm going to go ahead and run this all the way out. So I started with a line here. This is interesting, right? So you go out to a certain point, and then you can bring another one right along with it and sort of cap it, and that does wind up looking natural. So you can bring lines out and do bits and pieces like that, and that's still going to look right. Alright, Redhead, take it easy, buddy. It's not really in frame, sorry about that. I have to make sure I keep this back here. I'm really now just going through trying to finish up all of the little, just get some interesting texture on the entirety of the piece. You know, I've got a little bit of a divot here, so I'm going to go ahead and put some reverse points in here. Just bring this around so, you know, like maybe the sediment actually came around. So it's a little bit more challenging to keep things looking relatively natural when you're doing really shallow relief. But again, this is also, I mean, by a little bit more challenging, it's not hard, it's just, you do have to be a little bit more gentle with the tool. Hey, Tiny Tusk! Glue and sand and rocks. Well, so that's the thing. That's the interesting thing, is that I don't necessarily think that this is all that... I mean, this is very much... It's similar to painting just a regular miniature, right? I mean, if I were to treat this like a brush, the motion is very similar to what you would do with a brush. I'm just sort of dragging the tool along, and I'm following it. Now, I'm adding a lot more detail here than you would necessarily need to do, just because it's fun, you know? And I'm trying to make sure that there's... Hey, Lurktheus! There's detail all the way out through this. So if you're concerned about maybe being able to do something along these lines, you know, just doing a lump like this one here will get you that look. And then you could just add gravel and flock in through this area instead of doing all of this, you know, the more fine straddle lines like I'm doing now, right? And you'll still get something that looks really cool and doesn't take much. And I think once you do the first one or two, you'll realize this is significantly easier than it looks. There's really not an awful lot to it. So I'm going to come in. I have another tool here which is sharper. I'm going to go ahead and just, in some of these recesses here, I'm going to get this a little bit more pointed. Going with that one. So, and this is an interesting point here. You can see how there's sort of a feeling like there's a piece of stone here. Um, yeah, Maha, I think you'll have a lot of success with this. I mean, it's pretty easy, and without a lot of effort, you get a very convincing look. One thing I would suggest is, if you're planning on doing this, go ahead and pull up a reference of some shale or slate or something like that, so that you have that reference right in front of you. Because you can see really quick, like what I'm talking about, where you don't wind up with lines, these sediment lines and these cleavage lines that come off in areas that don't, they all terminate pretty much into another line or an edge. You know, and I'm up-detailing this quite a bit. This is, you know, I'm just sort of playing with it and adding more and more and more finer detail here. Which is something like, you know, if Elric's Hobbies decides that they actually, hey, Oogly, if they decide they're actually interested in carrying a line of these, I would definitely go through and increase the overall level of detail drastically. So I would take it past what I'm doing here and really push the detail shown. So part of this also, I'm coming in through here and just making sure that I don't have any visible fingerprints. It's relatively easy while you're doing this to just sort of gently touch the material on the edges, and that just introduces more fingerprints as you go. So, like a dried lava flow. Yeah, I mean, it could be like a dried lava flow. The overall look is relatively similar. I need the round here. And you could probably paint this up like igneous rock instead of sedimentary, and it would look really convincing. You know, you could also come through and add, so I'm going to go ahead and scribe this down some more, as if there is that, there's a bit more of a sort of separation there. The fun thing with this also is that when it comes time to paint this, if you just want to go ahead and do a quick dry brush, that is more than sufficient for getting this type of thing painted. Make the edges look softer, yeah. It's an unfortunate byproduct of the fact that it is very, very white on white on white. So, and there's not really a good way around that, unfortunately. So you can continue playing with this for quite a bit of time. I mean, you'll also, as you're playing with this, you can begin to, this is a good way, I think, in a lot of ways, to start sculpting stuff, because as you're working on this, you'll begin to feel the putty start to cure. And it'll help you understand, I think, how the stuff behaves as it goes through its curing process and starts to harden up. Bases are important. Yeah. So it's interesting. I had a conversation with Anthony Rodriguez, or Pirate Monkey Painting, when we were at Adepticon talking about basing, and this is something similar. I think that I've had a couple of conversations with this with some of the higher level painters about how your base is effectively the frame that you're putting around your figure. So if you spend a lot of time painting a figure and you just do a sort of lackluster base and you don't spend time on it, it's like painting a masterpiece and then framing it in plywood. It winds up really detracting from the overall look, and it sort of lessens the overall impact of what you've put so much time, effort, and energy into. So, now, I mean, I'll admit I have a biased opinion. Basing is one of my favorite things to do. Basing and terrain are definitely what I prefer to do over painting figures and the like. But, it is important. So, alright, so I'm thinking this one is getting pretty close to being complete. And what are we looking at here? We have been up for 30 minutes. So, you know, you probably, if you have several hundred figures, you don't want to spend 30 minutes on each base. Spider Mandy, hey! But again, this at the 10-minute mark, you could probably have stopped, and you'd have a really successful base that you can go ahead, set aside, and let cure, and add a little bit of talus, rock, flock, whatever you want to it, to sort of mask the areas that you're not as happy with. You know? But inside 30 minutes, you get something that looks pretty decent. Yeah, I miss your face too. So, alright, so let's start with a smaller one. Let's actually go for one of these 30mm ones here. So, Tiny Tusk, it is epoxy sculpt. Excuse me for a second. Needs more coffee. Man, coffee is awesome. I love coffee. So yeah, it's this this stuff. So, Avs Epoxy Sculpt. You can get it, or Aves or Avis. I don't know exactly how to pronounce it. They have a bunch of videos online about how to use this stuff. And it actually details here the working time. So in 30 minutes, sticky most adhesive, 1 to 2 hours easy to work with, 2 to 3 hours setting up formable detail, 24 hours card cured and waterproof, which includes chucking up in a lathe, drilling and tapping, all those things. So I probably want about half this. So I'm going to go with a smaller amount for obvious reasons, since I'm now going to go ahead and do a 30mm base. This is probably still about twice as much as I need, but I tend not to mix any less than about this much, because once you start getting smaller volumes, it's much easier to mess up your ratios, and you run the risk of getting to the point, or messing the ratios up to the point where it will no longer cure. And I think for obvious reasons, that's not something we want. So, any tip on sculpting the foot placement for the Mini? Sure. So, at this point, if I wanted to say, let's see, I actually have a Judgment figure in front of me here. let me get this set up here, and then I'll show you. So again, checking, still a little bit too much of the part B. Those are pretty similar. Okay, so if I wanted foot placement, in this case, well, let's go with whatever her name is. So this is a judgment figure, so it's 54 millimeters, so it's a little bit bigger than what you would normally see, or what you would deal with, right? And this is her actual base that I've been working on, so she's actually supposed to fit down in there. But for your epoxy tiny cocaine scale, yeah, but it's not by weight, it's by volume. So if I wanted to place her on this base, I'd just go ahead and dip her in a bunch of water, and say I wanted her right here, right? And I wanted her to make sure that she fit pretty well. Just press in. And now I've got a spot for her foot. And that's it. So now when this were to be completely cured, it'd look like she was sort of lunging off of that portion of the rock, right? So in this case, I don't want that, but there's still plenty of time to go ahead and come in and use that. I'm just going to go ahead and add some lines here. And this is what I mean about it being pretty forgiving. So, let's see if I can get that to, there we go. So that was her foot, and now it's just an additional little added detail, little divot or whatever else in the piece. So, you know, I mean, you can literally, with this type of stuff, come in with really funky different things to go ahead and start your shape work. Yeah, itty-bitty ice cream scoopers. That would work pretty well, actually. So we'll go ahead and mix this up. This out of the way because I don't want to put my elbow or something in it. You'll also notice I typically flatten out the two-part material. I do this for green stuff. I do this for milliput, pretty much all of the two-part pieces. Because if you squish it out, you can see streaking between the two different types of materials if you don't have them mixed up well. So it's a good way to go ahead and make sure that you have a really good, complete mix of material. And then what I'll do is once I get to the point where I think it's completely mixed, I'll keep going for a little bit longer. You know, because you got about 30 minutes or so where this stuff is super tacky, easy to use. Alright, so tear off a bit here. Let's see what we got. Yeah, sure. So we'll go about there. I'm actually going to use a holder here, if I can get this to come off. Just because 30mm bases are so challenging to hold on to. So this is just some blue tack. Okay. So this gives me something to work with. So, like I said, NG Lamines, hey buddy, I'm going to use this It's a creature caster spin down dial. I'm going to start the material shaping with this, just to prove the point that you can use pretty much anything. So I'm going to start with that. You know, it's nice and random. Looks as though I do need to form this up just a little bit more, though. I'm getting out over the 30 millimeter base. So I'm going to start by pushing all of this material back into... Come on. The blue tack wasn't being nice. Okay, let's try this again. Happy day before chocolate sales day. Huh. Alright, so one more time. Here we go. You know, just sort of random application, making a mess of stuff. And what I'm going to do here, I'm actually going to go with this one. Don't think he quite got that. Apparently not. I've been known to be dense at times, though. I'm just going to start scribing lines here. Just to keep this and sort of keep the shapes that I've got going on here. So really, I think maybe this is too much material. So we're going to go ahead and do that. It's just too high. And, ow, hey! Will be heavily discounted. Oh, okay. Goes to show how much I pay attention. Alright, so one more time. Back to using a tentacled head for our shape, our starting shape. I'm going to move over to this tool here. Jeebus, Mandy, stop riding me so hard. So it's just a little bit smaller. It's a little easier to work into these preformed shapes that the, well, I guess you could call it a tool that we set up or started using. So we've got a little bit of particulate left on this. All right. And I'm just going to, again, use this to go around each one of these shapes and start introducing these horizontal lines, just like you would, you know, painting edge highlighting or any other type of technique there. So, and I'm introducing something that's sort of like a little bit of a uplift. So I'm going in at, instead of going perfectly horizontal, I'm drawing in these lines at an angle. So I'm starting down here, coming all the way up and stopping about there. Move back to this one. And I think I'll set that up so that it just continues for that portion of this. So one of the things that you can also do, and you'll see this if you take a look at references of shale or slate, pretty much any sort of layered sedimentary rock, so not sandstone, but shale and slate do this, where you'll wind up with a portion of rock that follows this sort of uplift pattern. And then right adjacent to it, you'll have something that's not uplifted, which is a little funky, but you know, sort of kind of how it works, right? So I'm going to add some separation in here by pressing this in and just introducing this line. Come back in here to complete these. Alright, let's go with this one because it's a relatively sharp point. And then from here, I'm going to go back to horizontal. I'm being a little bit more careful because I feel like it. But again, this is all very much, sounds good to me, Luminous. Enjoy lunch. And yeah, I'm also quite glad I'm beginning to feel better. It was quite the long haul of feeling like garbage. My wife is adamant that I don't do the drive the way I did again this year, next year. But Mandy, if you do move onto the drive path and you're still interested in doing like a carpool type thing, that would be pretty awesome. Yeah, I mean, that would be super cool, because I think also that would do a pretty good job of making it so that I don't... they really are, Al. They are so much better with friends. So we're doing much the same thing like I did with the bigger one, where I'm adding... sort of micro detail here. Not something you gotta do. But I like doing it. It's, you know, push it a little bit, push the envelope a little. So I'd also be able to, at these points, I figure if I do a class, I'll wind up getting some of the sample sizes of Av's epoxy sculpt so that everybody has their own little tub, and a set of sculpting tools as well, so that you walk away with the ability to make more bases. What's adorable now? Hey, Chris Frozen, how you doing? If you want, well, actually, I mean, I suppose we have quite a few folks that are streaming out of the 18 folks that are here. But Chris Frozen, if you're interested in watching somebody paint really boring Citadel figures like Necrons and stuff to an extremely high level, Chris is your guy. I'm pretty sure at some point we will convince him that... oh, tiny epoxy tubs. Yeah, well, they have, like, sample sizes. Um, so... And I'm bouncing it back and forth between tools here. Not really necessary, but it is easier. It does make things just a touch easier for me to do that, so... knocking some of these edges down too. So that is a nice thing about... hey, Julie! How you doing, buddy? It's good to finally see you in the flesh at Adepticon. It was a lot of fun. So one thing that you do want to pay attention to, I've gotten a portion of this here probably a touch too wet. I could just leave it alone for a little bit, but I've gotten used to the point where, where I can actually work with that as well, but it may prove to be a little bit more challenging if you do get too much water introduced into what you're working on. So that is something that, you want to get your tools damp but not actually wet. Or you can use the safety solvent that Av Studios has, which will not cause the material to get, yeah, it does get challenging when it's too wet. Heyo! Are you sure it's challenging, or is it just more fun? Alright, so I think that's probably pretty good for that, that gives you an idea. You'll also, you can sort of see how I've started at this general area and then sort of work the pattern all the way down over to one side. Here, let's do this one too. Oh, I suppose I can take this off now. Give unto me as a base. Oops, I just freaking introduced a bunch of fingerprints, god damn it. Taking it off. Damn. Let's fix that. Doop-a-doop-a-doop-a-doo. Fail! Son of a gun! Alright. Continue making the fingerprints that I just put in this go away. Yay, dude. There we go. Alright, I'm going to set that aside now so I don't mess with it anymore. And then let's do this. It's just texture! Yeah, it's true. It is just texture, but I don't like fingerprints. So I look at it and I go, yep, those are my fingerprints, and I don't like that. Alright. So I'm going to do this one more traditionally, where I'm just going to introduce the texture more organically here. So, we'll leave that like that. I think that's pretty good. So, got a little extra piece. It's just the way of things. So, I've sort of roughed in. I got some high areas over here, some lower areas over there. I think this is a 40 millimeter. So I'm going to start by just smoothing most of what I've got out. I like that though, so I'll keep that there. I'm going to keep this sort of indent because it's there, and why not? um, and I'm just still trying to keep these lines basically horizontal regardless of what tool I use. Alright, but that's probably too smooth. So what do? I smooth it out even more, right? There are fingerprints in there and I don't like that. So one of the things that helps is to really just sort of make the motion jagged. So it's a little bit more challenging with a sharp pointed tool like this, whereas with a round like this, you can push in and pull out a little bit more. Hey-oh. Play into my audience there, right? When you're sculpting bases, remember, Murphy's Law has fully appliance. The base always falls towards the wet side. Absolutely. It does. Alright. Start doing this here. So I'm letting the texture or the elevations that I put in just with my fingers and work those in part where the lines of strata occur. Lathius, I always assumed that was because the clay or similar was just heavier than the empty space of the plastic underbase. Yes, however, if you were able to, say, strap a bunch of wet bases to the back of a cat, you could make a hovercraft. Because, of course, cats always land on their feet, but bases always land wet side down, right? So, much like you could do something similar with toast, buttered toast, which always lands butter side down, it would just float. Let's do this. Let's bring this one into there. And then we can continue that line out this way. So I let the piece itself dictate how these lines are going to wind up showing up. For this area here, I'm going to need a more pointed tool to be able to get in here properly. Would fall on their butts. I was just typing that, right? edges, we can be a lot more aggressive, not really pay anywhere near as much attention. Get these fingerprints out of here first. Nice, so we've got this natural sort of indentation here, and I'm just pressing the tool in to start those lines. Jan, hey! And back healthy-ish. Yeah, I'm not 100%. I'm still coughing, but the family, me and the family all went out to Epcot yesterday to walk around, and man, oh man, did that frickin' kick my ass. So I'm still not back to fully functional, healthy self by any stretch of the imagination. But, I mean, you know, pneumonia takes a while to get back on your feet from, so... yeah, you know, so I'm just going to continue working these lines, and as this gets more defined, you can also be a little bit more aggressive with the amount of pressure that you use. So I've got a bunch of lines in here, but then I can go ahead and pick one and make it more pronounced. And what that does is that pushes a bunch of the other ones around a little bit, and it gives this feeling like even the larger areas have, or the very small edges that I put in there also have small layers of shale in there. So that's a way to cheat in additional micro detail without really doing anything, which is always good as far as I'm concerned. So we've got a relatively flat point right here. So I'm going to be a little bit more careful about being gentle with the tool so that I don't introduce too deep of a set of lines. But by working, guy with micro detail, heyo. So by continuing to just add more and more lines, as you start to continue to work these layers, some of them will get a little smoothed out, but it'll keep some of that underneath if you're you pay attention to being relatively gentle with the tool. And that's sort of a cheaty face way of getting extra detail into what you're working on. And And also, it's one of those things where if you don't like it, you can always just squish it and start over again. It's pretty easy to do. So this is starting to firm up. I've been working with this same set of putty for a little over a half an hour. Interesting song. So we'll get this finished up here, and then I think I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna actually stop the stream for just a second so that the video stops, because that way I don't have to worry about trying to edit this section out. That way, Shoshi can use this as a sort of a way to showcase what this class might actually be like. Because this is pretty close to being done here. Maybe a little bit more there? Yeah, why not? Little bit more scribe detail in here, and this is again where you can do as little or as much as you want. I do like to have a lot of extra little itty-bitty portions of detail in these things, though, because it just makes painting them easier. You don't have to cheat extra detail in with the paint process if the detail is already there to go ahead and pick out with the brush. Alright. So that's pretty good, I think. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to pause the stream for just a second, and then I'll start it right back up again, so that this winds up putting a stop in the, and stretch, of course. Yeah, so I'm going to stop and then start it right back up again. Stick around for just a second.